Dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm Francois Houyez. I work for Houyez, the European Organization for Rare Diseases, which I represent at the European Medicines Agency. And today I will explain you the roles you can have at the agency. So first, Houyez signed an important code of practices guiding the relations between patient organizations and the healthcare industry. This is to explain how serious responsible we are when working on one hand with industry and the other hand with regulators, so that we explain clearly that there is no conflict and that all this is highly transparent. And I encourage your organizations to also sign this code of practices. If you want to learn more details on how patients work with the EMA, there is an annual report published on the website of the EMA that explains all the interactions between patients, consumers, healthcare professionals, and the European Medicines Agency. To give you an idea, each year, and even during COVID-19, it's more than 1,000 patients who interact with the agency in one of the many activities. And here a few are listed. For rare diseases and orphan medicinal products, there is a committee called Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, where patients are full members. Scientific advice and protocol assistance, which is specific for rare diseases. This is to provide advice to the developer of the product, for example, on how to measure the efficacy, how to measure quality of life, or how to design the clinical trial, etc., 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 where the contribution of the patients can be very rich. There are other committees, the Pediatric Committee, the Committee on Pharmacovigilance, the Committee for Advanced Therapies, where patients are also members of the committee. The committee that decides, that makes an opinion on whether or not a medicine should be authorized, has no patients as members, but they consult with patients in many different ways. They can interact early. The rapporteurs who are appointed to evaluate efficacy, safety, and quality can interact early via a short document based on interviews of patients, usually done by Houyez, for them to have in mind what really matters to patients regarding the disease, the treatments that already exist for the disease, and what patients would expect from the new treatment. Later in the evaluation process, if there are specific questions for clinicians and patients, the same committee can organize scientific advisory group meetings. And later, if there are still outstanding issues, they can call for an oral explanation with the company, where again patients and clinicians can contribute and understand the decision making. Other activities are from many task forces and working groups at the EMA, and of course the Patients and Consumers Working Party. There are at present 53 patient organizations or consumers organizations eligible to work with the EMA, and the Patients and Consumers Working Party, which meets 4 times a year, is composed of 22 patients or consumers organizations, and all representatives of the EMA, well, representatives of all scientific committees at the EMA, to improve the way patients can be involved in all EMA activities. A first action that would be extremely important, extremely useful if you haven't already done so, would be to list all the symptoms, all what the disease is changing in the life of different patients with Rett syndrome. And if you could even sort of organize, classify the different symptoms, which ones are the most frequently impaired in patients with Rett syndrome. The more precisely you describe the disease and its impact, and where you expect a new medicine to act, to be effective, this information would really help the evaluation of new products, but it could also attract the interest of different researchers and manufacturers. Maybe they have products that could help addressing one symptom in particular or different symptoms. But to define your own unmet medical needs and how you see the disease manifestations in general and in different subgroups of patients is extremely useful. As said, from the moment there is a submission of a marketing authorization, 2 rapporteurs are appointed among the members of the scientific committee, CHMP, and from the very beginning of their evaluation of efficacy, safety, and quality, they will request the feedback from a few patients by interviews on what really matters to the patients. They will then have questions, they will share their reports, their evaluation reports with colleagues, there will be questions with the companies, and if needed, interactions with patients, clinicians, and possibly a hearing with the company if needed. And after their opinion, the European Commission has a maximum of 90 days to publish the decision. So the maximum is 210 days for the EMA. This can be more rapid if data are extremely clear and the dossier well done. But for advanced therapies, such as gene therapies, it can be longer because of the time needed for the Committee for Advanced Therapies to also assess the product and for the appropriate interactions with different experts to take place. More time is needed for advanced therapies. So how can we best involve patients? And this is general for all products, gene therapies or other products. The way you will be involved, you might be involved, is about the same. You first need to find the patients. So for this, the EMA already has a database of experts, of patient organizations or individual patients, and they know the disease they have or they represent, and they can contact them. They can also contact all patient organizations they work with. For rare disease, it's frequent that they contact Houyez, and we can identify more patient advocates than the EMA has in her database. Then you need to prepare the experts. You need to explain what the procedure is, what is their role, which documents they will receive and when, plus complete the administrative tasks such as filling in the declaration of interest, etc. Then you have the involvement itself, the participation in the discussions. You can take part in face-to-face meetings. You can be interviewed online. You can respond to questionnaires, and you can also conduct or take part in patient preferences elicitation studies. At the end of my presentation, I will tell you a few words about such studies. Once you could contribute, there are 2 things. First, how to include your contribution and the contribution of all other experts to the report, but also evaluate your contribution. And for this, you will have an opportunity to explain, for example, if you felt you were well prepared, or if you felt that you were listened to during the meeting, etc. And then there is the acknowledgement of your participation. 2 examples, apart from product-related discussions at the EMA, there are many other things, many other roles, many other input in their work that you can contribute to. Here is an example of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and this is an initiative by parents, patients, and clinicians. As until this was completed, the main way to evaluate the efficacy of a medicine was to ask patients to walk for 6 minutes, measure the distance, and see if the distance would increase or decrease with a new treatment. But this would not work for patients with Duchenne dystrophy who are already in a wheelchair and who cannot walk, but these patients, they need to be able to use their hands and arms. And therefore, the parents contacted the manufacturer of a medical device that you can fix at your ankle or wrist, and which will measure the velocity of your movements, either the arm or the leg, the feet, and that has now qualified. The EMA can use this tool to measure the efficacy of products. And there are many other such connected devices or medical devices that can help measuring the effect of a medicine. And all patient organizations are invited to brainstorm with academics and developers of such technologies to see which ones could help in your disease and which research would be needed. This is another example of an important interaction, and in fact it was the first interaction between the EMA and patients back in 1996, and I had the pleasure of being part of a delegation that met with the committee at that time. At that time I was advocate for HIV and AIDS, and us, the patient representatives, we had attended many scientific conferences where we had collected a lot of information on how to assess the efficacy of antiretroviral treatments, not based on mortality or new cases of AIDS, but the efficacy of the products in reducing the numbers of copies in the body, knowing that if you can guarantee that the number of copies can be reduced below a certain threshold, this would translate in lower mortality 6 months later. And that is what you call a surrogate marker. So we showed all the data we had collected in scientific conferences to the committee, and they organized a scientific committee, a scientific workshop dedicated to how to measure HIV viral load, and if HIV viral load could replace the classical mortality endpoints, which they did. And you see the result of this was to shorten the duration of clinical trials from 3 to 4 years in average to 16 to 24 weeks, measuring the quantity of virus in the body and the evolution under treatment, and no longer the mortality. That's quite an acceleration for the development and the commercialization of treatments for AIDS and HIV. You can have an excellent summary of all the activities that patients can contribute for the development, regulation and safe use of medicines in this report from the Council of International Organizations in Medical Sciences, CIOMS, a report published last September, which you can download for free, and you can read here all the chapters covered in this book. It's really a textbook, a reference book that explains to industry, to regulators, but also to patient organizations all you can do along the life cycle of a medicine, except HTA and pricing, but that's another story. So to finish, I like to share a few words on patient preferences elicitation studies. What is this? Usually when, for example, this committee at the EMA consult patients, they would invite 1 or 2 patients, ask questions, and see, for example, how the patients weigh the benefits, the side effects, the difficulty to use the product. But if you could have feedback from a larger group of patients, the information would be even more useful than the contribution of 2 patient advocates. And there are different techniques. This one is based on discrete choice experiments, and it was conducted initially on multiple sclerosis for a monoclonal antibody called natalizumab. And this is how it looked like. You had to select first the main benefits expected from treatment A or treatment B, but these treatments, they also have side effects, different ones. So here you see a comparison of what they do, positive or negative, and you ask the patients, based on these elements, on this information, would you prefer treatment A or treatment B? And here you see they would prefer treatment B because of no relapses, slower disease progression, and to them the liver failure risk, the fatal liver failure was quite limited, and so they preferred treatment B. And then you can change some characteristics, and here now treatment B has some relapses and same evolution than treatment A, and you can ask again to the patients which one do you prefer, and here you see a change, it's a half and half, a 50-50. So with these techniques you can capture how patients weight the respective benefits and or side effects of a given medicine for a given disease. And you can also present the results like this, so comparing natalizumab versus a comparator, and you see in green it's the capacity of natalizumab to reduce the relapse rate or to slow down the disease progression, or it's easier to administer than the comparator, so you gain points. There are fewer seizures, fewer flu-like reactions with natalizumab, so you continue to add points to natalizumab. Then there are some effects which are neutral, and then you have some effects where you lose points. Natalizumab loses points because it does less well than the comparator, and that's the case for hypersensitivity reactions, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, and transaminase elevations. And at the end you have a score that expresses how much patients prefer natalizumab compared over this comparator. The same method can be run in regulators or healthcare professionals, but it quantifies the preferences of a certain group of patients. And this information can be extremely useful as an information among many other information when the regulators are making their decisions. To conclude, I would say that engaging with us, the patients, is not just to contribute to the evaluation of medicines, but it's also a matter of trust and transparency. We can assist, we can be witness, see how these important decisions that affect our lives are made. Even if we don't contribute, we should be there always. And if we can contribute to the scientific discussion, then even better, of course. With a high-quality dialogue, we can only agree with regulators, but we need to build this high-quality dialogue. And it can be via surveys, via patient preferences elicitation studies, but it can also be by taking part in scientific advice discussions. We can only agree with regulators if we have the quality dialogue we need. And the EMA would be extremely interesting in the years to come or months to come to expand, to explore new methods to capture, to obtain feedback from patients via different techniques like the patient preferences elicitations. For all this to work, we need to be trained on all the possibilities we have to influence, inform, take part in regulatory activities. The Houyez Open Academy or the UPATI program are examples where you can register yourself if you haven't done so already to learn from other patient advocates what it means to develop and evaluate a medicine and how the regulatory process works. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.